background on what we're talking about tonight or this afternoon. We are going to talk about NorthWestern Energy's rate case before the Montana Public Service Commission. The Public Service Commission, PSC, is the entity that oversees our monopoly utilities and tries to provide a balance between customers and the customers' needs and the affordability of their rates, and a utility that is a monopoly, so has an inherent need to satisfy its shareholders. So really, your public service commissioners play as like a referee in between those two entities to make sure that rates are affordable, that electricity is reliable, and that your utility is healthy, because a utility that goes through bankruptcy means that it has to pay a lot more money in order to borrow money from banks to do the work that needs to be done to make sure our energy system is affordable and reliable. So it's always in the best interest of everybody when you have a healthy utility. But what has happened in Montana is we have been seeing in recent years a real lack of oversight of a utility that seems to be stuck in the last century. So the rate case is an opportunity for a utility to come forward and ask the Public Service Commission to raise rates in order to pay for those services that it is supposed to be providing. And NorthWestern, less than a year ago, received a rate increase from the Montana Public Service Commission, in which the PSC allowed them to charge 28% more for electricity for customers in NorthWestern service territory. NorthWestern is already back, once again, asking for another increase in rates. This time is also a dramatic increase. They have been hiding the ball on how much that increase is. Nick is going to discuss with you why NorthWestern's marketing says that it's an 8% increase, when the reality is this is a 26% increase in base rates. It is really important that customers understand what NorthWestern is requesting, that you know who your public service commissioners are, and that you have the tools you need to make a difference in what your electric bills are every month. MEIC, however, has intervened in this case. That means we are a party to this case. We are bringing experts to the table. We are legally allowed to ask NorthWestern questions that it is supposed to answer. And when we engage in that case, it's like engaging before a judge. And when you engage before a judge, you're not allowed to lobby a judge. You can lobby legislators, but you cannot lobby judges. And so what you will not see from MEIC as we proceed with this rate case, which will take about 9 months, we probably will have a decision sometime in the middle of next year. But what you will not hear from MEIC is MEIC asking you to contact the Montana Public Service Commission. Many organizations will do that, but MEIC will not. What we can do is provide you the information you need to know what's going on. You can also look to other organizations to figure out how you can engage, but we apologize. It is just part of the legal process. We are not allowed to tell you to call your public service commissioner. So we will not be doing that, but we will give you the information you need to know what's going on. And when there's a time for you to talk to your commissioner, that's your prerogative. You can do that. It's not something that we will be asking you to do. But because these rates affect every single Montanan who is a NorthWestern Energy customer, we hope you're paying attention, and we hope you share this information with your friends and family. I'm going to turn this over to Nick, who's going to walk you through the details of what NorthWestern is proposing. And I just want to say that every day I thank my lucky stars that Nick is here. He's our energy transition engineer. He has been engaging with Earth Justice, our attorney in this case, trying to dig through the enormous volume of materials that try to hide the ball, honestly, about what NorthWestern is proposing. And trying to figure out what NorthWestern is requesting is no easy task. So I'm thankful Nick is here and that he can give you a lowdown on exactly what is being requested in this rate case. So Nick, go ahead.
Thanks for the introduction, Ann, and we'll walk through the different parts here and then save some time for questions at the end. And if there's anything that we end up not being able to answer, you can always follow up with us after. But let's dive into it. So first, wanted to set kind of some context of where we are, and mentioned that not too long ago, the Public Service Commission approved a 28% increase to electric rates in Montana. And at the time, NorthWestern Energy customers were paying the highest electric rates in the region once those went into effect. And here on the side, we can see analysis performed by the New York Times showing that given the current rates that we're paying for electricity and other forms of energy, Montanans rank 4th highest in the country for how much we pay for energy in the state. And kind of where this current rate case lands us, there's been other movements for regional utilities rates. And NorthWestern currently sits around 3rd or nearly 2nd for the highest electric rates in the region. And if this rate increase goes into effect, then again, NorthWestern customers will have the 2nd. And we're going to look at in a second what that looks like. So this is a chart I put together kind of comparing what rates folks are paying across the region. You'll see Portland General Electric has gone up substantially since NorthWestern's last increase and has more. But looking at NorthWestern Energy, this kind of breaks out where we are currently paying and where you might expect this rate increase to lead us if the Public Service Commission were to approve it. It's important to note that this is the bill you would expect for a 750 kilowatt hour customer. That's not necessarily an average customer, but it is in the ballpark. And I'm going to get into this a little more in a bit, but I broke out the increase here between these two sections. The dashed line is about where the on paper what the increase immediately would have, the impact it would have on rates. But what we're going to talk about more is this other piece of the equation, these pass-through costs, where really in the short term, NorthWestern is claiming there's going to be some other reductions. And while some of those are likely true, the overall extent of the numbers from our own look and a number of other experts' look really calls these into question on whether or not those will be sustained or if those costs will come back and hit customers. And I'm going to come back to this graphic in a moment once we've talked about that a little more. But first, I wanted to kind of break out the main pieces of what NorthWestern Energy is asking for. So like we mentioned, there is a 26% increase to base electric rates. That number is drawn directly from the application, but you got to dig deep to actually find it. And included in that is over $2.3 billion in lifetime costs for the Yellowstone County Generating Station methane plant that has been built near Billings. The NorthWestern Energy originally said that was going to come online this summer. They're now saying October 18th. That has yet to have a prudency review by the Public Service Commission, where they would determine that that was actually a good investment for the utility to make, and therefore the customers should pay for it. Also, what we're going to talk about is this other piece, this coal strip reliability account, which is effectively a blank check for future investments in the coal strip plant. And no costs are actually written into the rate case itself, but what that would put customers on the hook for is an additional $2 billion in rates that aren't currently reflected in that 26%. There's also an increase to gas. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but that's not really our focus here. And then the final piece is a request for interim increases while the Public Service Commission deliberates the overall increase. And there's some pieces of that that are really unprecedented in kind of normal utility rate making. So before we dive into those pieces, I do want to get more into that 26% base rates. What does that mean? So effectively, rates are divided into two main components. The base rate is what NorthWestern Energy has to go in and file a full rate case to change that number. And it's a pretty large process to make any changes to it. And we're seeing this 26% in NorthWestern's numbers, which is a big increase And also what's important to know about that increase is that that's where NorthWestern Energy is making its money. They're getting a return on their fixed infrastructure costs, such as, say, a new gas plant that they just built out near Billings. So that's the one piece. And the other piece is this variable piece, and that's where things get confusing. The power costs and credits adjustment mechanism is a pass-through. It includes mainly cost for fuel as well as energy bought and sold on the market. And that is more of a fluctuating cost. It's adjusted every quarter, and it can go up and it can go down. And what NorthWestern has presented in this rate case is a substantial reduction in this metric, and that is offsetting the 26% that we saw, that we see in the base rates. And part of that reduction is potentially going to be truly realized if they are indeed bringing this. If they were to bring Yellowstone County Generating Station online, maybe we would expect to see different pass-throughs, but they're also paying more fuel for that. But the really questionable part of that is NorthWestern kind of presents the rate case and presents this piece as they are reducing the need to buy power on the market. But that's really not true. And whether or not getting into what that means, the numbers show that NorthWestern actually projects doubling the amount of electricity that they'll be purchasing on the market from the current amount, while meanwhile projecting selling nearly 6 times as much energy into the market. And that is where the reduction comes from. They're showing that they're going to be making money and bringing those costs down. But what really makes us wonder is where is that energy coming from and how are they going to move it? And that's really from our own analysis and other expert analyses, including a retired analyst from the Public Service Commission themselves, don't understand how that is possible. So that's really where we're drawing into question that reduction. So now with that context, we can go back to this image and see that somewhere in that kind of range is what we might expect to see the final actual increase it be. Because if NorthWestern gets this reduction in the cost that they would recover, the next quarter that could come back up. So effectively, if they don't, how that variable cost works is if they don't collect the right amount, they can go back and recover up to 90% of what was under collected. And the fear is that they're going to get this 26% base increase and then come back and show that, oh, we actually didn't sell the power onto the market that we thought we were going to. So we're going to need to charge customers more. So that's something that we're really trying to dig into and figure out more about. And I do want to note on that point that we had someone point out that the Public Service Commission recently made a press release that electricity rates were going to go down about 5%. And that is related to, that's a short-term bill impact that just happened because NorthWestern was shown to have over-collected by some margin of these variable costs. But what that effectively what is going on there is part of this this reduction in variable costs that we're going to see, but substantially that isn't really a benefit that we're going to be seeing long term in this case, and shouldn't be taken too seriously. So then getting into what the expenses are for the methane plant, the Yellowstone County Generating Station. There's the cost of constructing the plant itself, which by NorthWestern's numbers is around $320 million, but they haven't released the final numbers yet. They will be getting a 10.8%, or they're asking for a 10.8% rate of return on their equity in the plant. That is higher than they are receiving in any other investments. Colstrip, which was already a high outlier, I believe they're getting 10% return on equity. Additionally, there is going to be annual costs for operations and maintenance, and then the fuel costs, which in the first year they projected at $35 million, but were natural gas prices, methane gas prices for that plant to go up, then that quarterly adjustment would take that into account and we could pay more for that. And what that adds up to is this number, if you extrapolate it out and plug in the rate of return, is going to be over $2.3 billion in lifetime costs if the PSC, the Public Service Commission, were to allow NorthWestern to put those into rates. This other piece, I'm going to hand it off here in a moment, but is this reliability compliance balancing account for Colstrip. And like I mentioned, these are costs that would be borne by customers, but aren't reflected in the numbers in the rate case. And you can explain.
Sure. Like Nick said, this number for this balancing account that NorthWestern is requesting isn't included in that 26%, and it is not included in NorthWestern's 8% figure. This is a number that is outside of any other numbers you've seen so far in the rate case. What NorthWestern is requesting is this account in which it could start collecting money from customers and tell the commission how much money it collected over time in order to pay for regulatory compliance obligations, such as the mercury and air toxics rule that the Supreme Court just allowed to go into effect, and EPA's new greenhouse gas reduction rule for power plants that will go into effect by 2032, they have to comply with that rule. So NorthWestern is not telling anybody how much it anticipates those costs will be for customers, but we know how much that both Talon Energy, the operator of the plant, and NorthWestern have said compliance with the mercury and air toxics rule will be. NorthWestern and Talon have said that range will be somewhere between $350 million and $600 million to comply with the mercury and air toxics rule. And that may sound like a lot of money, but the bottom line is almost every other utility in the nation has already installed that type of technology on their coal plants. This is not new technology. This is technology that's been around for decades. It's technology that almost every other coal plant has already installed. NorthWestern just didn't. They didn't bother to control or limit their mercury and air toxics until EPA told them they had to. This is a plant that has the highest emission rate for mercury or for air toxics of any other plant in the nation. Unit 4 has the highest emission rate. Unit 3 has the third highest emission rate for toxic emissions. When I say toxic emissions, I'm talking lead and arsenic and cadmium and all sorts of a slew of other pollutants that go into the air when you burn coal. NorthWestern hasn't bothered complying with a more rigorous standard, as has every other facility in the nation. So now they're stuck with having to pay more than they would have if they had installed this technology when others had. We would argue that NorthWestern should have to pay for that lapse in being protective of people downwind from this facility. But anyway, we know that cost for installation of mercury and air toxics is high. NorthWestern went to the U.S. Supreme Court and asked them to stay this EPA rule. In other words, to say that this rule doesn't go into effect until the court decides the merits. We were worried that NorthWestern was going to get what it wanted. MEIC filed a briefing in that case before the Supreme Court, and last Friday, we had a huge victory where the U.S. Supreme Court denied NorthWestern and Talon their requested stay of the rules. So the rule is in effect. NorthWestern is required to comply with that rule by 2027 with the possibility of a 1-year extension. And this really is an inflection point for the owners of the plant to decide whether they can if they can affordably pass those costs on to customers for a plant that simply isn't going to be around that long in order to recover that amount of money. So this is a really important decision-making point for the owners of Colstrip. But NorthWestern doesn't want to tell the Public Service Commission how much this is going to cost. It doesn't tell the commission whether it's going to be adding in not just the cost for its current 220 megawatt share, or whether it's going to be adding in the shares for Avista and Puget Sound Energy that it's going to pick up at the end of 2025. If NorthWestern intends to charge its customers 55% of the cost for installing this technology, we certainly deserve to know. The Public Service Commission needs to know. We need to know if this is an affordable resource. And NorthWestern is hiding the ball, probably because it doesn't think this is an affordable resource. So that's the first one. The second one is compliance with the greenhouse gas rule. And NorthWestern also has not indicated what those compliance costs may be. We know the Department of Energy did a report on Colstrip back in 2018, in which it analyzed how much it would cost to install carbon capture and sequestration technology at that facility. And what the Department of Energy did is it refused to release the results. MEIC sued the Department of Energy in order to access the numbers in that report. And after suing them and finally having them release that information, we learned that DOE had estimated it would cost $1.3 billion to install carbon capture and sequestration on units 3 and 4 and only achieve a 63% reduction. That is not what the rule requires. The rule, fortunately, is strong and requires a 90% reduction. So it's going to cost more than $1.3 billion, and that's in 2018 dollars, to control carbon from this facility. It's also going to cost over $100 million a year for the operation and maintenance of that system. These are really expensive inputs, upgrades to a facility that is already at the end of its useful life. And NorthWestern wants to just have the Public Service Commission approve what amounts to a blank check from customers to pay for these upgrades without any zero justification on whether this is the right course for the state of Montana, whether it's affordable for Montanans, whether there are better options available for customers, affordability and reliability. Because remember, the Colstrip plant was half down during the cold snap that we experienced in January, and it was 100% down during some of the hottest temperatures of this year in Montana. So in July, when billing saw 109-degree temperature, the entire Colstrip plant was not online. So this is not a reliable plant that we need to make sure that we're not either freezing or boiling in the summer. This is an unreliable facility, and NorthWestern needs to come clean with telling us what these costs are going to be, so we can decide if we want to pay or if there's another path forward that's less expensive, cleaner, and better for the environment and people's health.
Thanks, Ann. And I wanted to note that a lot of folks have been wondering if NorthWestern Energy's announced acquisition of further share in the Colstrip plant is a part of this rate case. And as far as the costs reflected in the rate case itself, it's not. So if NorthWestern were to acquire Vista's share and Puget Sound Energy share in 2026, then customers would have to pay for additional operations and maintenance and additional fuel for that plant, if not other expenses. But the piece of this rate case that is concerning in that regard is specifically this compliance account, and likely customers would be on the hook for a greater share if NorthWestern were to become a 55% owner in the plant, like the utility intends to. So that is another important piece of this rate case. And here I wanted to show and mention this. The plant being unreliable was half offline during the coldest days of the year in January. And these are a couple of the hottest days we experienced this last summer. This was July, where we see coal on this graph. This is information provided by the Energy Information Administration. It shows all the electricity in NorthWestern Energy's balancing authority, which includes energy that's managed, electricity that's managed, but doesn't necessarily go to NorthWestern's customers as well. But we can see there's 1,500 megawatts at the Colstrip plant when both units are running. One plant is offline on July 18th when that goes down to about half. And then within the hottest days of the year, the entire 2 units are offline. And that plant that NorthWestern tries to claim is reliable is offline, and we are relying on other forms of energy. And we can see in that time that wind is providing a tremendous amount of energy to the portfolio. So I'm going to touch briefly on this piece of methane gas. There's been a lot of volatility in the cost of gas recently, and really always. In the last rate case, there was a 13% increase to natural gas. There is another increase this summer that was approved of 33%. And now within this rate case is a 17% increase. If you go through and look at the numbers, that's a total of 76% increase before the PSC within a year. And while that total increase probably isn't what's going to be finally reflected on your bill because of the volatility and the adjustments where things would go up and come back down a little bit, that is still a tremendous increase contained there. And it's important to just realize how volatile, expensive, and damaging that gas can be. And also important to note there is that the Yellowstone County generating station, since that is a electric plant, the fuel, the gas fuel that goes to power that plant is actually factored into your electric rates, and that's part of that variable adjustment. And while the gas that NorthWestern delivers to its gas customers is from a different source than the fuel that it is drawing for that plant, the price that the customers will face for fueling Yellowstone County generation station is still subject to this volatile national gas market. And this next slide just gives you an idea of what the price of gas does. And it is extremely volatile. We see these tremendous spikes where all of a sudden utilities and therefore their customers are on the hook for really tremendous prices. And it's not predictable. It's not clean. There's a lot of issues there. And this last piece of the rate case itself and the asks that we are really trying to dig into is the interim rate increase request. And it is somewhat standard for utilities that are regulated by the Public Service Commission to come to the commission in their application and request some interim increase to cover expenses while the Public Service Commission is deliberating whether or not or what amount of cost increase that it will allow. And if the utility is shown later to have over collected in rates, then those over collection is it is returned to customers, but it's important to know that it's over a longer period than it was originally collected from customers. So while customers are feeling that impact acutely, NorthWestern gets to kind of lazily trickle that back into rates over a longer period. But what's unique about this specific increase is really what NorthWestern is asking for, and won't be able to get too deep into really what is going on, but effectively NorthWestern is asking for recovery of not even costs for Yellowstone County generating station, but money from ratepayers for Yellowstone County generating station to the extent that they are saying the plant will be saving customers money. So they're saying that because we have this plant, we are going to incur this amount fewer costs, and therefore we are going to charge customers for those costs. So customers will not see that benefit, and they are just asking for additional money. One that is completely unprecedented. It also goes against what is allowed for interim rates by the commission's rules. And they're also asking for more money for the plant in this interim than they actually are asking for in the final rate request. So all of these pieces together really just are kind of fly in the face of what we would expect in an interim increase. And The NorthWestern originally requested that the PSC make a ruling by October 1st. That has passed. There's no ruling. NorthWestern later updated that ask for November 1st, citing that Yellowstone County Generating Station wouldn't go online until October 18th. But there is no obligation for the PSC to actually comply with that timeline. And from what we've heard, it doesn't seem like that will, there's nothing on the radar that would indicate there's going to be a decision soon, but we can keep an eye out and potentially expect to see that increase sometime in the coming months. And the final piece to note there is, while there is this big increase for Yellowstone County Generating Station, the entire offset of those variable costs would also go into effect in this short term, at least in the first quarter. So the bill impact has been demonstrated to be lower than it might be were those variable costs to go back up in a future adjustment. So now that we kind of know all these things that NorthWestern Energy has asked for and is seeking in rates from the Public Service Commission, I wanted to explore a little bit about what they could be investing in and charging customers for, were they to follow some maybe different incentives and not just try to completely make as much money as they can with no regard for the impact to customers or their damage to the climate. A recent study came out this summer from the National Renewable Energy Lab that showed Montana having the second highest wind energy potential in the country. That is behind only Texas, which operates in a different grid entirely, and the fourth highest solar energy potential. There's tremendous potential for these sources in our state, and it's also highly affordable. We've seen that these are some of the cheapest forms of energy available. And in a moment, I'm going to show a slide that kind of demonstrates that. And the other piece is NorthWestern Energy is not looking into any storage. The United States has seen tremendous growth in energy storage, and just this last quarter was the biggest quarter of install, and we're seeing just huge growth and drops in costs for that technology. But NorthWestern Energy doesn't have any storage on its system, and while at one point when the Yellowstone County Generating Station was selected as a resource that NorthWestern Energy needed, there was also simultaneously selected a storage resource. Somewhere along the way, NorthWestern Energy dropped the storage resource, built Yellowstone County Generating Station, and now here we are, still with no storage on the system. And I'm also going to show some metrics on what is happening with storage. But first, here's that graphic, and this is based on data provided by NorthWestern Energy to the Public Service Commission with some other comparisons. But we can see the different resources that NorthWestern Energy has in its portfolio. And on the right, this nuclear reference, that's a plant, I believe in Georgia, that is not part of NorthWestern's portfolio, but just to give a reference of that is the running rate of nuclear energy compared to the other resources that we're working with. But as you can see here, the wind energy on NorthWestern Energy's portfolio is some of the cheapest electricity available. And we have these renewable contracts, which includes almost exclusively wind, solar, and some hydro, is also incredibly affordable. There's two plants that are fossil fuel in that, and those are much more expensive and actually drive up the overall average. And then we see coal strip there in the middle. We see the reported amount that costs customers, but there's also this kind of question mark of how much more this plant is going to cost to customers over its lifetime. And there's, like we mentioned, these costs that NorthWestern is trying to pass along in the balancing account for investments at the plant, but also what has not been included in rates is remediation costs, which is standard for utilities to collect those at coal plants throughout the life of a plant. And that's something that has been requested of NorthWestern for years, and they have not reported that. We don't know what remediation is going to cost, but they surely, at whatever point that plant does end up shutting down, are going to try to get that money back from customers. So there's a real question mark on how much that plant actually is costing. And then this estimate for Yellowstone County Generating Station is based on the numbers provided in the rate case, projecting the operation. So we see that gas is just very expensive, coal very expensive, and there's these more affordable options that NorthWestern has not been investing in. And then briefly, just to give an idea of where batteries are at, this is the cost of batteries over the last about 10 years has come down dramatically. And with that, we've seen that the amount of batteries built on the grid has in turn increased dramatically. And there's been tremendous build out. California and especially Texas, I believe, are leading the way. Texas, I think, surpassed with the most battery storage installed, and NorthWestern is nowhere to be seen in that arena. So now that we've kind of gone over the rate case, I wanted to close and just give kind of an overview of who the decision makers are for energy in Montana. We've talked a lot about the Public Service Commission. They are the body that regulates monopoly utilities, and they allow or disallow NorthWestern to recover rates from customers. There's also the Montana Consumer Council, which is appointed by the legislature, and they are called for in the Constitution to advocate for Montana consumers, and at the Public Service Commission to make sure that our concerns and needs are voiced. And unfortunately, we have seen kind of mixed performance from that body. And a big reason that the last 28% increase was approved was because the Montana Consumer Council signed on to a settlement agreement put forth by NorthWestern Energy that included that 28% increase that would be passed on to residential electric customers. So we are hopeful that the Consumer Council will better advocate for the needs of consumers. And the last decision maker is the Montana legislature, which really creates the regulatory landscape that these other entities and NorthWestern Energy operates within. And the last piece of the rate case, this is just kind of a general timeline. The rate case was filed in July this year. We could see an interim decision before the end of the year, but that's not required. There's a public hearing that is tentatively scheduled to begin on April 22nd, 2025. And then the final decision could be next summer or so. The last rate case with a similar kind of time frame, the decision came out in October. So we will see how that plays out. And if you have any more questions, and we're going to start answering them here in a moment, you can feel free to reach out to myself or Ann for further information. And if you want to support this work that we're doing, I believe Katie was going to drop this link in the chat for donating and helping support our continued work in all these things. But with that, I would love to open it up to questions and see how much more clarity we can provide.
I would like to start with Gary's question in the chat, which is it at all feasible to have a credible renewable storage portfolio, closing Colstrip and operating the Yellowstone County Generating Station only as a peak plant, and demonstrate the much lower cost than keeping Colstrip? Gary, that's a great question. And the answer really should lie in NorthWestern's integrated resource plan. That's the purpose of the planning process. They're supposed to be, NorthWestern is supposed to be creating an integrated resource plan every 3 years. It's supposed to be looking at not only its resource portfolio, but also other potential resources and comparing them. And NorthWestern hides its work at best. NorthWestern doesn't give us all the information that we need to determine whether it's done a good job on those resource portfolio plans. But what they really fail to do is do a rigorous analysis of what you could do with renewables plus storage. NorthWestern likes to look at all its resources in that resource plan, those resources it doesn't like, in other words, non-fossil fuel resources, and it likes to say, we could replace all of this energy that we need with just wind, or we could replace it all with just storage. And that's not how the system should work. It's not a good way to go forward with the modeling. It's why we've been fighting to get in the room in their IRP process for this next upcoming IRP, because NorthWestern doesn't actually model what it needs to model to determine what is the best and cheapest way for customers to receive energy. The IRP process is really critical. It's supposed to be driving these types of decisions on resource acquisitions like the Yellowstone Generating Station. But NorthWestern is cooking the books. It does it in the resource planning process. It does it in the request for proposals, making requests for proposals only viable for the types of energy resources it wants, as opposed to the types of energy resources that are serving utilities all over the country. We need a better utility, and we need better oversight of that utility, because it's not doing the job that we need in order to move into the modern age and provide affordable rates. But what you're asking, Gary, is a great question, and it really is why we really want a better resource planning process. I would also like to do one thing. I know there's a couple others here who are also engaged in the rate case, who are interveners, and I'd love to give them an opportunity to talk about things we missed. We have a pretty hyper focus on fossil fuel resources. And if anybody else who has intervened wants to say a word or two about what they see as other priorities, please feel free, but don't feel obligated.
Thanks, Ann. This is Mike with the Northwest Energy Coalition. Nick, great presentation. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so we are intervened alongside NRDC and the Human Resources Council, District 11, who's a local low-income customer energy benefits agency. And I think we'll be looking at a lot of similar issues to MEIC. We're still in the early processes of kind of scoping out our engagement in the case, but a couple things I wanted to flag is that in the last rate case, I know that the Montana Commission ordered that several advisory groups be assembled to look at demand-side management programs, low-income customer protection programs, and different alternative rate-making possibilities. And it's my understanding that really that hasn't occurred at all in the last couple of years. So we're going to be continuing to put some pressure on the company and asking the commission to make sure that, you know, we get actual teeth to make sure that these types of programs that can benefit customers are actually examined more closely. I know too that, you know, NWAC has historically looked at the utilities rate design and, you know, how it's structured in order to kind of provide incentives for customers to enroll in energy efficiency programs. And that hasn't happened over the years. So I think that there's a possibility that we maybe take a look at some rate design issues as well, particularly as they're related to energy conservation and the incentives for those. But yeah, I think that the main issue that you'll see us going after is also taking a hard look at the prudence of the Yellowstone County Generating Station plant. So really appreciate the information that was shared here today. And, you know, I think that there were some flaws in the RFP process that led to the selection of that resource. And, you know, like Nick has said, there were a lot of other resources that could have been brought on at lower cost and risk to Montana customers. So we'll be making sure we're taking a close look at that too. And of course, working closely with MEIC throughout the whole process.
And I just want to add that we're really thrilled to have Mike involved, because Mike worked for basically the Consumer Council in Oregon for a while. So he has a lot of familiarity with how some other utilities do this type of analysis, and can bring that to light in this proceeding. So we're really, really pleased that Mike and NWEC are participating in this.